There is an explanation for why the US economy is resilient, continuing to grow steadily despite high inflation, interest rates, and unemployment. And the simple answer is that it's not. The US government is celebrating economic growth based on recent GDP numbers. But today, we will look at far more accurate data that shows us that we are not in a strong economy, but rather a stalled economy, and one that is twice as bad as 2008, and I will prove it. But before we dig into these charts, let's make sure that we all understand the basics of what I'm about to explain, because the media only shows you what they want you to see, and this is too important not to understand. You've heard of the GDP, gross domestic product, which is the value of total goods and services in a particular period of time. It attempts to tally the total spending by government, businesses, and consumers. The GDP has a lesser-known sister gauge of the economy called the GDI, or gross domestic income, which is the estimate of all income from salaries and wages to corporate profits and rent. If you think about it, the two gauges should always arrive at the same total, because every dollar spent, which is accounted for on the GDP, is someone else's income, which is accounted for on the GDI. But as you might have already guessed, this is not always the case. The Bureau of Economic Analysis, or the BEA, the government agency responsible for calculating all of this data, states on their website that differences can occur because of sampling errors or timing differences, which makes sense if it was only a small diversion. But why don't we go ahead and look at this together and you tell me what you think. Here we have real GDP and real GDI. Real just meaning that they're adjusted for inflation. And if we look at this chart over time, we can see that the two lines are pretty in sync. We're going to look at present day, but first let's look at history and see what we can learn from 2008. So if I go ahead here and zoom in to 2008, I can see that there is a strong divergence happening leading up to and during the Great Financial Crisis. Now, why would these two differ so much during a recession? Why is the GDI so much lower? Well, many say that the GDP is actually overstated. And I'm sure you've heard that pertaining to present day, but we're going to talk about why. So the GDI, again, measures real income, which is a lot easier to get accurate information on versus trying to come up with the total of all goods and services. Often the GDP has a non-sampling bias, and they're missing very important factors like the birth and death of companies, which the GDI is able to capture in a way that the GDP cannot. The GDP also overstates the fact that spending, which is leading to demand and output, could be based on American savings and debt, something we saw happen in 2008 and we know is happening today with Americans being completely over-leveraged, which is why it often misses that turning point when we're looking at recessions and crisis. So what is happening today? Well, let's take a look. If we go over and zoom in on present day, we are going to see a strong divergence, a growing divergence. So if we look at this right here, for Q2 of 2024, we saw almost a $616 billion divergence between the two, or roughly 3%. For context, the largest diversion we saw in 2008 was about $300 billion. It is a double divergence, which should tell you something about what is coming next. The reason that our government and the media keep claiming that we're not in a recession is because GDP has been strong, but ultimately the GDI is telling us a different story. It is stagnant. And again, we know that the GDI has been historically far more accurate when looking at recessions. The scary part of all of this is that the GDP actually gets revised to the GDI because, again, the GDI is more accurate. And sometimes these revisions don't happen until it is way too late. In fact, we can look at 2008 as a perfect example of this. If you don't believe me, let's look at this chart, because sometimes it's not even just years, we are talking decades here. All right, so here I have this eye-opening chart that I found that shows what the estimate was for GDP growth year over year for 2008, as well as Q1, 2, 3, and 4 for 2008. Now, we can see overall the estimate was positive at 1.3% and Q1 positive at 6%. Now, these numbers change because it is an estimate, and then there's the final estimate, and then there's revisions. But if you go all the way down here to the bottom, you can actually see that it took 10 years from 2008 to 2018 for them to revise this down to negative 1% and Q1 to be revised from 0.6% down to negative 2.3%. And you mean to tell me that I should trust the numbers that are coming out of the BEA today, that I should take at face value what the news is telling me about GDP growth being strong? The same way that I should have trusted that there were 800,000 new jobs created that didn't even exist? No, because I could be sitting here in 2034 having the exact same thing happen where we were told that the economy was strong and growth was upward, but in reality, it was stagnant and the numbers were there all along trying to tell us the truth, that the economy is not strong. Government spending has masked the reality of what is going on, and the GDI backs up what the people are saying, what we all are experiencing and know to be true. And I know someone out there is going to be saying, well, if this is really that much more accurate, why aren't they using the GDI? Why are they using the GDP? Well, they claim that it's because the GDP comes out first, which it does because, again, it's an estimate. So much of it is based on guesswork that they're able to get it sooner. But the reality is they don't want anyone to panic. They don't want anyone to be upset about the economy. They are doing everything they can to mask the reality of what's going on, which is why it is so important to make sure that you do not have all your eggs in one basket, that you do not have everything in the system, that if you don't already have your insurance policy in place for wealth protection, now is the time to do it. Because we can look at these charts, we can look at this divergence and see what's coming next, especially when we look at history, when we look at how it acted in 2008 compared to today. It is clear, the writing is on the wall, the time is limited, and the time to act to protect yourself is now, which is why, again, I tell everyone, and I'll say it again, make sure that you have a strategy in place. If you are concerned about any of this, talk to one of our expert analysts. Click on the Calendly link below. Do not wait, do not think I'll come back to this next week, I'll come back to this next month, because you never know when time is going to run out. We both know that it can't go on forever. I know you know that the same way I do. So make sure that you take action now, because I don't want anyone kicking themselves later thinking, I really wish I had made sure that I had a strategy in place, that I was diversified in non-USD assets, in physical, tangible gold and silver, and something that is protected outside of the system, outside of their control, today. That's all. That's my soapbox. I appreciate you being here. I mean, let me know what you think. Do you think that we're in a recession right now? Do you think that the economy is as strong as they're saying? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I love reading everything that you have to say. And as always, thank you so much for being here. I'm Taylor Kenny with ITM Trading, your trusted source for all things gold, silver, and lifelong wealth protection. Until next time.